Ahsoka Episode 5 is in, and controversy abounds around the episode. Fans are highly divided about what they saw, arguing over whether or not the things that happened should have. But that's not all. Those who had hoped that Ahsoka would be the series that began to retcon or erase in some way the sequel trilogy are finding out that this is not indeed what is happening. And one Pablo Hidalgo is out there mocking perhaps those who had been the purveyors of such information. Folks, it's time to dive into one of the most controversial episodes of Star Wars we've ever seen. Well, that was weird. The fifth episode was supposed to be the big one, the time when Ahsoka, the series, really stepped things up and changed direction, perhaps even made major impacts on Star Wars itself. But it's an odd episode. I do not yet know what Lauren Connor has thought of it. I definitely know what I think of it. But before we get to the review of it, let's talk about this. Folks, what we're looking at right now is a deleted tweet by one Pablo Hidalgo. Now, Pablo Hidalgo and those of us at that Park Place have spoken twice. Once, about a year ago, I suppose, where Mr. Hidalgo answered some questions we had publicly on Twitter. And then there was another time a few months ago that he said something about us. I'm not sure exactly what that was, but only times we've ever had communications. We know that many out in the community do not like Mr. Hidalgo, do not like the way that he treated Star Wars theory. And, we understand that totally. This original tweet has been deleted. I don't know what you call it now on X. This post has been deleted by Pablo Hidalgo. It came out prior to Ahsoka Episode 5, and essentially it mocked those who believed that this episode would begin retconning or undoing the sequel trilogy. Now, there are those out there who've been promoting this. You have not heard anything like that on this channel because we believe in reporting accurate news and analysis. However, some out there have been saying that Ahsoka was going to be the way that Dave Filoni and others were going to retcon the sequel trilogy, and Pablo Hidalgo was mocking that. He has still left, though, up the responses that he gave to himself to this now deleted post. It says, be skeptical of people who lie to you for money. Keep that in mind, and everything else is cream cheese, yada, yada, yada. When I want to go to you, some had anticipated this would be the kind of episode that saw the retconning of the sequel trilogy. As long as Kathleen Kennedy and her crew are there, I don't see any reason to ever believe that would happen while she's in charge. Lauren, what do you think about Pablo Hidalgo, though, making fun of those who would wish for the sequel trilogy to be retconned, perhaps?
I'm probably going to go in a different direction here. I don't disagree with anything that he said there. I think he's right. I think he knew that there were a lot of people that were kind of waiting with bated breath for this episode. I made my opinion known on our last review of the show that I did not believe that this was really the world between worlds and that this was going to be a massive misdirect. We can get into whether or not that was the case when we actually get into the review of this episode. But the key tenet of what I was saying there was that the world between worlds would not be used. And part of why I was so upset during last week's episode review was that I felt they wanted the impact of seeing the imagery of the world between worlds to get that major moment when you see Anakin, and that it was essentially going to be a misdirect where it's not really used at all. And I think that Pablo is correct here. If people are telling you what you want to hear, and especially if they're charging you money to hear you say what you want to hear, you should probably be at least a little bit skeptical. So I don't know that he was necessarily making fun of fans who believe that this was going to happen, but I think that's probably a legitimate warning.
I think he's both correct and incorrect. We're not here to defend Pablo Hidalgo in most cases, but both correct and incorrect. Correct in that he knew that this was not going to be the retcon of the sequel trilogy. So, he's got that advantage. He knows what's going to happen in this series and other series in the future. Incorrect in that I think, and by the way, I think he knows he's incorrect. Otherwise, he wouldn't have deleted the tweet. But incorrect in that I think there are so many fans out there who want the sequel trilogy to be undone that uh, mocking any part of their hope, however misguided it may be, I think that that's dangerous for him. It's dangerous for Lucasfilm because the vast majority of people despise the sequel trilogy. So, make fun of their desires to see it undone in any way they can at your own risk, Lucasfilm, Pablo Hidalgo, and others. Now, we're not here to tell you that they're going to do that because we don't think that Lucasfilm is interested in giving the fans what they want, flat out. And Lauren, we're going to get into the review of the episode now. Let's dive into that. I'll tell you what I think about it. One, I guess I would call this Whale Ex Machina. So that's going to be my name for the episode. There are so many convenient plot occurrences in this episode that it is quite impressive. Everything always lines up exactly as it must in order for the story to progress forward. Lauren, I'm going to feel so badly if you loved this episode. In hindsight, I think this episode is garbage. So, Lauren, tell us what you think.
Okay, you're going to be upset with me.
No!
I'm not going to say I love this episode, but I'll say that I was surprised by this episode. And before we get into it, I want to address something that I've seen in the comments on our previous episodes. There are a lot of people that do love the show, and I acknowledge that. I know there are a lot of people that are big fans of Dave Filoni's work, and there has been some commentary that we're just nitpicking and trying to hate the show because that's what this channel is. And I think when we started reviewing this show, I wanted to take great pains to say I have a bias. You kind of know what my bias is. I don't accept the sequel trilogy. I don't accept a good share of Disney Star Wars, but there are portions that I do, and I wanted to make that clear up front. By and large, I've not been a fan of Ahsoka. And I laid out in last week's review sort of what I thought was going to happen in this week's episode and why I thought that the World Between Worlds was a giant misdirect that was not actually going to be used and that it was going to be used to chew up more time, to be kind of Filoni has a reputation for having lots of filler episodes, and I sort of figured that was kind of what was going to happen this week. And I think the argument could be made in a way. I think that is what happened, but they did it in such a way that I was actually entertained. And so I had a good time with this episode, and there's a couple of reasons why, and I think we can get into that when we get deeper into the plot of the episode. I think the first thing I would want to address is the World Between Worlds itself. Do I think that Ahsoka was really in the World Between Worlds? My answer is no. I do still think this was a misdirect, and I think that what was occurring all occurred in Ahsoka's mind. And what Jason was hearing when he heard the lightsaber battles was he was reaching out to Ahsoka, sensing her, and the battle that was going on within her mind. I do not believe that Ahsoka was at any point actually within the World Between Worlds. However, they told the story in such a way that either proposition could be true, and they can leave it ambiguous in that way so that the audience can make up their own mind.
Now, wait a minute. Let me counter that. I'm not sure that's true, Lauren, but you know so much more about Star Wars that I'm on dangerous ground here. If it was the World Between Worlds, why would Anakin be the Anakin that leads into Darth Vader rather than the Darth Vader the Anakin who is redeemed by Luke?
Well, the argument could be made this is the Anakin that was redeemed by Luke, because this does take place post Return of the Jedi. At the end of Return of the Jedi and the special editions, you have the younger Anakin that appears as a Force spirit. You could argue that if this really is the World Between Worlds, then it is that redeemed Anakin who is appearing to Ahsoka, but he is choosing to teach her by using the knowledge that she has of his fall, to have some introspection into her life as a Jedi leading up to that point. And part of this is where I'm getting into the things that I like, but also dislike about the episode. But that has more to do with the philosophy of Star Wars as it's been presented. And so I think this is an area where it's easy to get into disagreements, but it's also where the fun conversation happens. And so that's part of why this episode entertained me, is that it actually does allow you to have a lot of deeper conversations about what the meaning of Star Wars is.
All right, so let's ask you a question then. If this is the world between worlds, and if this is the Anakin who was redeemed by his son Luke Skywalker, then why is he acting like a turd even until the very end? Why is he attempting, at least symbolically, to strike down Ahsoka?
I don't believe he really is. This is a test of her conviction, much like Luke's was in the cave on Dagobah. Uh, he would know that she is aware because they've already had their battle on Malachor, where she struck him and broke his helmet. She knows that he became Darth Vader. She knows what became of him, and so she's harboring these reservations about training Sabine, and she's also having reservations about her role as a Jedi throughout her entire time as a Padawan. She is questioning what the Jedi's role is, and she's questioning specifically what the prequel era Jedi did, which is that, as they said, they stopped becoming peacekeepers and they became soldiers. And so he is presenting at that point in the vision his rationale for that at that time as he was acting in that role. And she's having to justify her own decisions, and he's seeing whether or not she will break in her conviction. And as it turns out, she does not. And it's
But Lauren,
then
you believe this happens in her mind, though. You don't believe that this
I,
is the world between worlds.
I do, but I also believe that you can argue either case. And my suspicion is that they'll never actually probably give a definitive answer as to which is true.
But she knows the story of Luke Skywalker. She knows that eventually that Anakin does defeat the Emperor and that he is the chosen one until Rey comes along and ruins all of that. Never mind. But she knows all of that. So if it takes place in her mind, how do we reconcile her knowledge of who Anakin becomes with the Anakin that plays out inside this vision?
Well, I think it still comes down to the fact that what she's really doing here is questioning, what are the Jedi? What should the Jedi be? What was my part in being a Jedi? And is the continuation of the Jedi still a good thing? I think that's what she is wrestling with and has been ever since she left the Order.
Now, let me tell you why I don't like the episode part one. I don't like the episode part one because the vision that she has, and I agree with you, I think this takes place in her mind, but the vision that she has looks like it is in the world between worlds.
Mhm.
And I think that's a purposeful, iconic misdirect in order to fool the audience into coming back for this episode. And that's what I don't like. If you're going to do a dream or a vision, don't put it in some sort of ethereal pathway with some sort of spiritual glass bridge between the two of them. Put it in an actual dream or what have you. I think that's done purposefully, and I don't like when writers do that. I don't like when they misdirect the audience. And then the other thing is that, I don't know the exact runtime on this dream, on this vision that she's having, but it's a long time. And
Mhm.
I don't know that the lesson that is gained at the end of it is worth the amount of time that we spend with this, other than to say, we put Anakin in this show for a long time.
So this is where I think the interesting part of the conversation will happen, at least for me, and I suspect with the audience when we start looking at the comments after this video comes out. Um, what I think was most interesting about this episode, I want to call out a couple of things. One, I think that the de-aging that was done on Hayden for Anakin was far better in this episode than what was done at the end of the previous episode. You can tell that the budget was spent here. And
Mhm.
I think they did a pretty good job with that. I also think that they were very clever on how they were shooting The scenes that took place during the Siege of Mandalore, everything is pink dust and everything's obscured, but you can see things in silhouette and shadow to give you the impression of what was going on during the Clone Wars. That's a savvy idea because it hides some of the lesser cinematic effects while still giving you the impact of what was there. I thought that was smart cinematography.
Lauren is describing how they managed to save money because it would have been insanely expensive to do otherwise.
Very much so. But I thought it was effective. I thought they did
Yep.
a good job, and I enjoyed seeing a live action portion of the Clone Wars again. I thought they did a good job with that. But what I think the crux of the episode is, and this is the part that I both like and dislike, and this is where I think arguments will take place, is this kind of comes down to a recurring theme with the Jedi throughout all of the Star Wars stories, and ultimately in the Jedi philosophy itself. And that is, when is it right to act? And when can we impose will and force on others? The Jedi, prior to the prequels, in many cases, when galactic conflict came up, the Jedi Council would sit on their hands, and a lot of the reason for that was that they had a fear of taking action and imposing will. The idea of balance is that the Force will take care of the balance itself. We don't necessarily need to act. But when you choose to do that, making the choice not to act is to act, and you are allowing others to then suffer, perhaps unnecessarily. And so this is the crux of the argument between Ahsoka and Anakin in this vision. Anakin is trying to say, we have to change with the times, we have to become soldiers in order to defend others. And Ahsoka's position is that I don't want to fight. I don't believe that fighting is solving anything. And ultimately, in her vision, she chooses not to fight him. And that is when Anakin determines that she has learned the proper lesson and that there is still hope for her. Now, this is where I go a little off kilter, probably from some others, which is that I think there are times when you have to act, when you have to take the chance potentially to defend others. And I think that there are circumstances where war and conflict are necessary. I don't think that there's an entirely black or white answer. And I fear that what they do with this going forward is they try and make the argument that the Jedi must absolutely remain passive and that conflict never solves anything. I don't think that's a good lesson. But I do think exploring that between the characters of Ahsoka and Anakin, especially in the way that they did, was actually pretty good. And it surprised me that they dealt with it in the way that they did, in such a way that I was entertained. I was like you in that last week, my big issue was that, okay, they're using this hook of the world between worlds and Anakin to draw you in, and they're not going to do anything with it. And in the sense that they didn't alter history, they didn't do anything with it, but they did do something to bring the debate about Jedi philosophy to the fore with these two characters that embody these two different elements of it. And I think that's actually richer storytelling than I was expecting from them. Also, Ahsoka, at the end of the episode, was smiling a lot. She was feeling more like her. You might also notice that her color scheme is changing. She's moving from gray to white, and it makes me wonder if we're actually going to get a reprise from the end of Rebels season 4 when we see her as Ahsoka the White with the staff. I think a lot of us thought that when Ahsoka came to Lothal in the beginning of this series and we saw them meeting and having a very similar conversation, I think we thought it was that scene. I'm not sure that's the case. Maybe they didn't retcon that, and maybe we're actually going to get another reprise of that later. Hard to say. All depends on what happens when they get to the other galaxy. Are they somehow going to come back? That seems odd if they're still going back to get Ezra, but there's still 3 episodes to go, so who knows?
Now, Lauren, it may surprise you, but that is not my biggest issue with the episode. My biggest episode with the issue are the pergil, the space whales, and here's why. We have been told since the very beginning of this series that there is one way to get to Thrawn. There is one way to get to Ezra. There is one way to get to that other galaxy. And so we have been chasing this MacGuffin now for the entire series. All of a sudden, once the MacGuffin is gone, once all hope is lost, all of a sudden the space whales show up. And not only do the space whales show up, but they then are able to put their ship inside the mouth of the space whale, although they can't put two ships in the mouths of the space whales, and no reason is given for that except plot convenience. And then our robo friend turns to Ahsoka and says, "Do we know where we're going?" And she says, "No idea, but somewhere is better than nowhere." It's a big universe, I would suppose, and galaxies are quite large. This is, I don't even know a good metaphor for this. This is like needing to go to a particular pharmacy, and instead of having a map to go to the pharmacy, you just decide that you are going to get on a rocket blindfolded, fire yourself up into the atmosphere, and wherever you land, that got you closer to the pharmacy. This part of the story makes no sense whatsoever at all to me. Please, Lauren, help me out.
So I've got a couple of points and counterpoints here. I will agree with you. This was the part of the episode that I liked the least. But I understand why they're doing it. So I'll start with why I liked it the least. They're at that moment where they're hopeless. They have no idea what they're going to do. There's no way to track Sabine. And they very prominently focused on Ahsoka looking at Sabine's helmet. And it seems to me that if Sabine is trying to have a foot in both camps so that she can go with Balin's skull, but also allow Ahsoka to find her, she would have recorded the map in her helmet and left her helmet behind. So
well, that's a great point.
When they focused on that helmet, my thought was, well, of course, that's what they're going to do. They're just going to replay footage from Sabine's helmet, and they'll have the map and they know where to go. And then the camera tilted up and I saw the pergil, and I thought, really?
I'm glad somebody else thought this. I'm so glad that you thought it.
However, the reason
pergil, I swear they're like the eagles from Lord of the Rings, but there's none of the metaphysical reason for them to be there in the same way.
Well, this is actually where I disagree, and I think this is why they're doing it, is that you have to remember this is space opera and mythology. It's not science fiction. So the metaphysical sense of the thing here is that the pergil are tied to the Force. It is the will of the Force that they go to this other galaxy and find Sabine and Thrawn. The pergil represent a natural manifestation of the Force, and by going into them to get to their destination, what you're having here is a spiritual rebirth. And I think that part of that is also reflected in Ahsoka's clothing as she moves towards Ahsoka the White. So I think
all of that, Lauren, all of that in a vacuum would be fine, except that the Force that wills the pergil to take them to the other galaxy to find Sabine and Ezra and Thrawn, to stop Thrawn, it's the same Force that we know leads to Luke trying to kill his nephew, and we've got Snoke that is a faux villain, and then there's a million Emperors who will show up, a million Palpatines with a million ships, and that's where all of this falls apart, is that they have a massive problem in the destination. And
agree.
The little roads to get halfway towards that destination aren't more interesting as long as we know that the destination is absolute. Well, I'm not going to say the profanity here, but it sucks.
100%. And I would say that none of this changes my feelings about the sequel trilogy or most of Disney's Star Wars, including most of the first few episodes of this series. But there's a couple of things that I want to give them credit for. And one of those, and I hate to say this because I actually, from Rebels, like the character of Sabine. But having Sabine not be here and have that forced drama between her and Ahsoka vastly improved my feelings on this episode. I felt that when we're focusing on Ahsoka, it's 100% better. She's the headline of the show. We need to be focusing on her.
And it has been the Sabine show up until this episode.
And I would say also that speaking as I did for seeing Hayden as Anakin again and seeing him actually looking pretty good, it looked to me, at least, it looked like, yeah, this is pretty much Revenge of the Sith Anakin. Yep. And the fights and the moves, it's like there were a couple of moves that Hayden pulled that it's like, now this does look like his prequel moves. I've been kind of a critic of some of the fight choreography before. This actually looked pretty good to me. And when I got you saw him during the Clone Wars sequence in his Clone Wars armor with the shorter hair and everything. This felt like okay. This if this episode were taken in a vacuum completely, forget about the rest of the show, forget about some of the other stuff. I could see it dropping into the Clone Wars or some other series that I would see as yeah, that's Star Wars. This felt to me more like Rebels. It felt more like it fit with it. I still have my issues with Hera. I still have my issues with how the New Republic is being portrayed. But by and
By the way,
large, the
I'm convinced that every individual who's a leader in the New Republic is a woman. Every single one of them.
one of the things that I it kind of I it stuck out to me during this episode that I think part of the reason that the New Republic isn't working, and this has to do with I think Lucasfilm's general mindset, is that they want to hang on to this idea they said in the last episode, once a rebel, always a rebel. They're constantly rebelling. They never respect any authority, including the one that they themselves created and installed. And I think that's part of why this feels a little odd. It's that they're always going to be rebelling against whoever the authority is, and I think that speaks more to the modern politics than maybe the original stuff did. The idea behind the original trilogy was that we're trying to restore a republic that represents the people. Now that they've done so, the people are all saying, "Nah,
Right.
we're not interested in that," and it feels kind of weird.
It's
But
a little bit anarchy, sort of. It just never. What are you battling for if not to create some sort of better and more just ruling system? And if you're just always going to rebel against it, then I don't know that you have any sort of principle other than to rebel.
right, but I do feel that here's where I'm getting into the weeds, and we are kind of nitpicking here. I think if you're looking at the episode in a vacuum, I felt it was pretty good. This one actually felt good to me, and it's not going to change my views
I
on where we're
can't I can't
going.
do it with the pergil. I can't. The pergil is what bothers me. It really because and okay, you are you are right, Lauren. If this one episode, if this was the only episode, I'm with you. I could like this, but it's not. And you've led me 4 episodes in to this little ball that you had, the map, right? The map. We've done this before with Star Wars. The map is the only way to get there. You do that to me for 4 episodes, and then you throw it away and be like, well, why didn't we just ride on the space whales before? Why,
Well,
why didn't we just pull a Jonah and get there?
this has been a major problem in I think most of the Disney Plus Star Wars TV shows. They seem to want to fit everything in 8 episodes, and a lot of times their story doesn't justify that. So let me throw a theoretical at you. If we were taking just this episode in a vacuum, and we get to the following episodes, and I think you would agree that Balin Skull at least has been interesting, wouldn't you say?
Well, as what we've seen, we needed way more of him. That would have been
So
nice.
so if they start tying that together, now that we're finally going to be in this new galaxy, there's going to have to be some revelations coming up. If that stuff ties together and works after this point, how are you going to feel at the end of this series if they actually do pull something off by the end? If say from this point on the episodes are good, are we giving the series a good rating, middling, or is it just trash?
Well, here's another question for you, Lauren, in the hypotheticals. Let's say that the following episodes are good. Let's say that we actually enjoy them, and that if we forget the first 4 episodes, that it's a pretty decent thing. Could we just drop the first 4 episodes then and say that we never needed the relationship, the Padawan relationship with Ahsoka and Sabine, that was a total waste of time, and that we could have just started with Sabine that everybody already knew, having been kidnapped and taken, and Ahsoka on the way to try to save her and Ezra and get to Thrawn, and we could have just started here in the first place?
One way I could see this working, and I wondered if they were moving in this direction, is the one way I have felt that they could make the Sabine thing work is if Sabine's arc is to realize that she doesn't need to be a Jedi. And if that's what Ahsoka is trying to teach her, then fine. I think that's actually potentially growth for the character that I think technically she's already had. But fine, that is an arc. If Ahsoka's place is now to accept that yes, the Jedi do need to continue, and that she does need to take on a Padawan, even if that is not Sabine. The obvious candidate is Jason. He's the one who heard what was going on with her. He could sense her.
Right,
He's
he's force
going to need
sensitive.
training. Yeah, so they're potentially. I could see them making that jump, and that's how you bring Jason into the proceedings going forward.
Well, okay, granted, if that is the trick that they do, I will retroactively come back and admit that I got this episode wrong. But until they prove that they can actually do something that clever, I will not cede the ground just yet. Lauren, whatever grading scale you want to use, where do you put this one?
I think I'm going to give this one a 7. To me, this felt like a good 7.
All right, and I'm going to be way different than you. So, folks, this is the first time this has ever happened. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. But I do so fully recognizing that I'm doing it based on the entire series and how aggravated and annoyed I am that we chased that stupid little ball for 4 episodes and all you had to do was ride with a whale and problem solved. And I fully admit that if you're right, and if they're as clever as you are, Lauren, and the message in this series is that even though Sabine is not the Padawan, that Jason is, and that the Jedi deserve to continue on, and sometimes you have to fight, and sometimes you don't. If all of those very deep lessons are what we're getting at, I will come back and admit Pro was totally wrong about this episode. But they have to earn that from me. I am never giving them the benefit of the doubt again. I have learned my lesson.
And I think that's fair. Like I said, to me, this is, I'm watching this as sort of an Elseworlds thing. It's not something that I'm really accepting as canon. Up to this point, the show has been pretty painful for me. But this one, I liked. I was actually entertained by this. I thought that Hayden got a lot more meat to work with here than he did with Obi-Wan. Thought he did a great job. The fight choreography looked good. They used the world between worlds in a more competent way than I expected them to. And so in that sense, it exceeded every one of my expectations.
I have a feeling that this is going to end one of 2 ways for us, Lauren. Either we get to the end of this series and you're like, well, Pro, I told you, I had a feeling I knew where this was going, and I'll go back and admit defeat on this episode. Or there's going to be a final episode where the camera starts and you have your face in your hands and you say, they're just terrible. They're just terrible, Pro.
Well, bear in mind, I'm not saying that I think this good arc is going to happen, but I think they at least set it up to where it could, and that's better than what I expected. So for this episode, I have to give it a positive rating because I was entertained. I wasn't feeling like I wish this would just end. This is painful. This episode made me happy. So there we go.
This is going to be very interesting to read the comments. So, folks, it's more important than almost any video we've done before. Drop a comment down below and tell us what you thought of this episode. I am grading it a 3 out of 10, Lauren a 7 out of 10. That is a major disparity. We are usually pretty well in lockstep, so it's time for you all to decide which side has the better argument here. Drop a comment down below. If you like content like this, consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe, and when you click it, you stick it to the algorithms. It's the notification bell. Also, Lauren, I don't know if you know this or not, but this morning, Valiant Renegade has released a video where, in my opinion, this is the big one. I mean, really and truly, everybody out there needs to go watch it. Valiant Renegade, along with Jonas J. Campbell, Jonas having been the primary investigator into this, they managed to figure out every code name for every production for Star Wars that has ever existed in the UK for the past 15 years, and they have managed to piece together through tax records exactly how much every single Star Wars thing that ever was filmed in the UK cost down to the penny, and they now know essentially how much Disney has lost on Star Wars. We will cover that same topic at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time as we analyze Valiant Renegade's video, the information that he brings out. This is, again, the big one, and I am excited to finally have the stats objectively ready to present and say, here's what the verdict is for Disney Star Wars from a financial perspective.
The only one I want to know is The Rise of Skywalker. How much did that thing cost?
Well, Lauren, I'll tell you, I already know the numbers. There's going to be a film that surprises you more. That's all I'll say. But, Lauren, where can people find you on this great, big, beautiful web?
You can find me on Lorne Connor on X. You can find me at Lorne Connor 9030 on YouTube. I write for that Park Place, and usually you can find me in Valiant Renegade's chat on his Sunday morning shows, though lately I've had a few conflicts, so I hope to be back soon.
And Lorne, my understanding is you are appearing this week on That Park Place, the YouTube channel as well. Is that right?
That's true. I do have a short little segment that should be coming out on the video shortly.
All right, folks, you are going to want to check out Lorne on the brand new That Park Place YouTube channel where they cover everything that should be fun. All right, well, that's a wrap for today. Tell us, are we right or wrong down in the comments. And folks, as always, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.
Oh.
What are you doing?
Well, you see, I wanted to get some inside scoops on Disney and their, different corporations, if you know what I mean. So I figured, by looking into this fistbowl and sucking it randomly with my own energy that I pay for, you paid for, I could do the whole experience where you can be a master and spy on your targets.
You're an idiot. If you want to get the inside scoop on Disney, or even other media organizations, you should check out thatparkplace.com and subscribe to WDW Pro's YouTube channel. That'd be way easier, more accurate, and, less dumb.
Are you saying I won't get accurate information this way?
No, you can't.
Who'd have think?